I'm Michelle, and we're exploring the genres. Today we're exploring the fantasy genre. Fantasy is a genre of speculative fiction involving magical elements, typically set in a fictional universe and sometimes inspired by mythology and folklore. Its roots are in oral tradition, which then become fantasy literature and drama.
Exploring the genres. Fantasy. First one we're going to start with is high fantasy, which is also known as epic fantasy. It takes place in an entirely fictional fantasy world. The stories are often lengthy and epic, involving many characters and extensive quests where the fate of the world rests on the hero's shoulder, like Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien, or Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Low fantasy takes place in the real world or similar to the real world and includes magical or supernatural elements. Characters often discover secret magical forces or supernatural creatures within their normal surroundings, like Harry Potter and the Sorcerer's Stone by J.K. Rowling, or Twilight by Stephenie Meyer. Portal fantasy is a fantasy where characters travel from the real world into a fictional fantasy world, often through a portal or a gateway. They usually get swept up in the problems and politics of the fantasy world, like in The Chronicles of Narnia by C.S. Lewis, or Every Heart a Doorway by Seanan McGuire. Fairy tale retellings are often called modern fairy tales. It's a fantasy inspired by a fairy tale. It often includes curses that need to be broken, witches, wild forests, princes and princesses, and evil queens or kings, like The Girl in the Tower by Catherine Arden, or Cinder by Marissa Meyer. Historical fantasy is set in a historical period of the real world. It's often offering an alternative version of history where magic and or supernatural creatures exist with a strong emphasis on historical accuracy. So essentially, it's the blending of the historical fiction and fantasy genres, like Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell by Susanna Clarke, or the Outlander series by Diana Gabaldon. Comic fantasy is a blend of fantasy and comedy. It has ridiculous or pathetic characters, quirky settings, absurd magical rules and creatures, like Warm Bodies by Isaac Marion, or Welcome to Night Vale by Joseph Fink and Jeffrey Cranor. Superhero fiction is examining the adventures and personalities and ethics of costumed crime fighters, known as superheroes, who often possess superhuman powers and battle similarly powered criminals, known as supervillains, like Superman Dawnbreaker by Matt De La Pena, and Batman Nightwalker by Marie Lu. You can find all of these books I've mentioned here at the library. We'll see you at the library.